Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to share a murder case that happened in Victorian England. England at the time was really dangerous, as the information I got. It said that violent crime only accounted for around 10% of all crime in Victorian London. These statistics don't take into account the swaths of working class deaths that often slip under the radar. There are a huge number of crimes left behind the record. That is really terrifying. One of the most famous cases, Jack the Ripper, must be the most notorious serial killer in history. It has happened in Victorian England exactly. Until now, 134 years after the murder, the killer is still not found. But today, I'm not going to talk about Jack the Ripper. I believe that Jack is well known enough, so I will introduce the Richmond murderess, Kate Webster, one of the notorious murderers at the time. And compare with Jack, you can say what Kate did was just a piece of cake. But Kate's case still sparked an uproar at the time. So let's start the story right now. I want to talk about the background of Kate and Thomas first. Let's start with Kate, the murderer in the case. Her full name is Catherine Webster, start with K. In fact, her real name is Catherine Lawler, start with C. Kate claimed that she has married a captain called Webster and they had 4 kids, and they were all dead. This information is by Catherine herself and was not confirmed. She was born in 1849 in Killeen, Ireland. There are less information about her earlier life and her family. According to the information I found, her parents were described as poor but respectable. But Kate was totally different. She started her criminal career at a young age. She was imprisoned for larceny in Wexford at the age of 15. Larceny is a professional word in law which means theft. She kept stealing after release. In 1867, she moved to Liverpool, just 1 year after she was imprisoned for larceny again. This time, she spent 4 years in prison and released in 1872, and she moved to London in 1873. She worked as a cleaner and maid there. At the same year, she met a man called Strong. He's the potential father of her son. Even if she had a child at 1874, she still not stopped her criminal career. She has been arrested for twice during 1875 to 1877. During the times, her son was took care by her friend Sarah Creese. She was also a domestic maid. At 1879, by Sarah's employer, who was friend of the victim, Julia Martha Thomas. They introduced Kate to work for Julia Martha Thomas. Julia Martha Thomas was about 54 years when she met Kate. She had been twice widowed, so when Kate worked for her, she was living alone. Thomas was described as a small, well-dressed lady by her doctor. On the contrary, Kate is tall, strong, and young, and also, Thomas was regarded as weird by her neighbor. She frequently traveled, leaving her friends and relatives unaware of where she is, for weeks or months at a time. She was a member of the lower middle class, and as such was not wealthy, but she habitually dressed up and wore jewelry to give the impression of prosperity. Her desire to employ a living domestic servant probably had as much to do with status as with practicality. However, she had a reputation for being a harsh employer, and her irregular habits meant that she had difficulty finding and retaining servants. Before 1879, she had only been able to keep one maid for any length of times. Thomas is said to have an excitable temperament in the summing up of the trial. Where Thomas lived is on Park Road in Richmond. That was a second-floor cottage. It is close to a pub called the Hole in the Wall. Remember this place. Now the story is begin officially. On the 13th January 1879, Kate started her service in Thomas' house. In the beginning, they get along with each other. Kate and also mentioned that Thomas was a comfortably off, although rather eccentric woman in her mid-50s. But due to Kate's poor quality of work and irresponsible attitude for work, her behavior irritated Thomas gradually. So she gave Kate notice, with Kate's dismissal to take effect on Friday, 28 February. During the period, Thomas was afraid of Kate. She even asked her friend in church or relative to stay with her. She's afraid of being alone with Kate. On Friday, 28 February, Kate pleaded Thomas to allow her for another 3 days, for she hadn't found a new job, a new accommodation yet. So she worked there until Sunday, 2nd March. On that day, the most terrible things happened to Mrs. Thomas that she would never think of. Or maybe she would. Kate was allowed Sunday afternoons off work, but had to be back in time for Thomas to go evening service. But the truth is, Kate got back late on Sunday. She went to visit her son, then she went to a pub on the way back. Mrs. Thomas was totally pissed off. She reprimanded her for the inconvenience. The church members said that Thomas looked agitated when she arrived. She told others she was late for maid's omit, and also she mentioned that Kate's emotion got furious when she got reprimanded. Mrs. Thomas went home earlier before the end because she suspected Kate's dishonesty and she was worrying that her house would be robbed. Unfortunately, Mrs. Thomas didn't ask for a company. So no one really knows what happened the night, and no one can save her. What happened at the night we can only know from Kate's confession. This is what she said. We had an argument which ripened into a quarrel, and in the height of my anger and rage, I threw her from the top of the stairs to the ground floor. She had a heavy fall. I felt that she was seriously injured, and I became agitated at what had happened, lost all control of myself, and to prevent her screaming or getting me into trouble, I caught her by the throat and in the struggle choked her. One of Thomas' neighbors, who was also Thomas' landlady, said that she had heard a heavy sound like a chair falling down, but they didn't look out for it. After Mrs. Thomas was completely dead, Kate used an axe to dismember her body, which means she cut her body part off in pieces. She cut her head firstly and scraped the flesh on it. It's horrible enough, but next you'll be freaking out and see how meticulous she was. She boiled the flesh she had scraped from the body parts and burned the bones. She did it for eliminating the DNA of Mrs. Thomas. And following few days, Kat kept cleaning the house and Thomas' clothes, and act normal as usual. She packed the body into different containers. The head was buried under the stubbles of the pub I have mentioned above, and feet were left in trash. On 4th March, 2 days after, she faked herself as Mrs. Thomas to meet her old neighbor that haven't seen each other for 6 years. That is so weird. She carried a bag with her and with the body part inside. Somehow, she disposed the bag on the way without noticing. After that, she asked her old neighbor for help to move a heavy case from her house to a train station. But when they went through Richmond Bridge, Kate threw the case into Thames. She provocated her neighbor, and amazingly, he believed it. A blessing in disguise. The case was found on second day. Another horrible thing is that the organs supposed to be inside were all gone. I can't even find a word to describe Catherine. That's so scary. Almost the same time, the feet was also found in other place. But the head was not found until 2010, after 131 years, finally found under the pub. And sadly, the forensic mistook the body as a young girl with black hair. Without identity, they buried her in a cemetery. Without investigation, Kate still lived in Thomas' house, faked herself Thomas. But on 18th March, since the day it had been 2 weeks, the neighbors started to suspect her. A delivery man came to deliver furniture from the house. The landlady asked who made the order. He said Mrs. Thomas, but as he described, that is not Mrs. Thomas, and that is Kate. Kate found out her crime was exposed. She went back to her hometown, and at the same time, the police came to Thomas' house. They found blood standing there, burnt bones, and a letter from Kate with her address in Ireland. On 29th March, she finally got arrested at her uncle's farm. She was brought back to Richmond. Her poor son, after her uncle knew her accused, he refused to shelter her son. He was finally sent to workhouse. This crime made a splash at the time. A lot of prestigious people came to the hearing. Before the trial, Kate tried to accuse the others involved in the case, but they all had alibi. She refused to admit the crime in the beginning. Her counselor even tried to defend her by she was a devoted mother. Apparently, no one would believe that. And finally, a photo evidence showed. A lady called Maria proved that Kate had visited her week before the murder. She said Kat told her about selling some property, jewelry, real estate. And after 1 hour and 50 minutes, the jury adjudged her guilty. She was sentenced to death, and on the execution day, she admitted her crime. When the black flag rose in the prison, which meant the execution was over, the crowd outside applauded loudly. Some regard Kate's personality that was totally opposite to the expectation standard of women, and her Irish identity were the reason why this case got the crowd uproar. I'm not trying to defend her, but one shouldn't be judged for one's identity and personality because they're not fitting others' expectation. However, Catherine Webster is still a horrible murderess, and I believe that if she was not caught, she will do the same thing again. So grateful she got caught, and wish Mrs. Thomas can rest in peace. I want to tell one interesting thing, that is when I type down the draft, I want to write rest in peace, which is PEACE, the peace, but I miswrote it as PIECE. And that's a little bit terrible because Thomas is really in pieces when she died. But yeah, it's also funny.